The last chapter of Rahim's life came quietly, not with sickness or tragedy, but with a gentle slowing, like the closing of a well-loved book. He still opened his shop every morning, still made tea for the early risers, still swept the floor even though it no longer needed sweeping. He did these things not out of habit, but reverence. Every breath was a small prayer, every task an act of love. His joints ached more, his steps slowed. He sometimes forgot the names of the flowers he once knew by heart, but his heart had never been more alive. One cold morning, as the frost still clung to the windows, Rahim sat at his bench and looked out over the quiet street. The world had changed. Phones buzzed faster. Cars honked louder. People moved like wind, now here and gone before a thought could form. But in this little corner of the world, time had listened to him. It had bowed its head and stayed a while. A child ran by, waving. Uncle Rahim waved back, smiling. That child's grandmother had once come to him, heartbroken after her son left for the city. And Rahim had simply said, "Love doesn't need permission to keep reaching. Keep reaching." Now, 3 generations later, love had returned, running, laughing, shouting his name. He picked up his pen and began a letter. Just a note to whoever needed it next. If you're reading this, maybe you've given up on your dream. Or maybe your dream gave up on you, and now you wonder if it was all a waste. Let me tell you what I've learned. Sometimes the dream that dies makes space for the life that's real. Sometimes what looks like a detour is the only road that leads home. And sometimes you only understand your worth when you stop chasing the world long enough to let it sit beside you. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not forgotten. You are still becoming. He folded the letter, slid it into the worn envelope, and placed it in the box marked to be opened when needed. That box had grown thick over the years. It held every letter he'd written to the broken, the searching, the angry, the lost. He never knew who would read them, but he trusted they'd find the right hands. One evening, a woman came to the shop, a stranger, nervous, clutching her shawl tight. She held a crumpled newspaper with Rahim's picture on it. "I came from the city," she said softly. "I thought maybe you could help me understand why I'm still so sad, even though I have everything I ever wanted." Rahim didn't ask questions. He poured her tea, sat with her, listened, and when she finally spoke her truth that she had left behind her art, her music, her younger self, just to be successful, Rahim only nodded. "Sometimes," he said, "the part of you silenced is still whispering. It doesn't want revenge. just to be heard again. Just enough to feel her own heart again. When she left, she took a letter from the box. She held it to her chest like something sacred. That was Rahim's final gift to the world. Not answers, not fame, not grand lessons, but quiet reminders that the human soul is soft, and that soft things survive. Spring returned. The jasmine bloomed again. And one morning, Rahim didn't open the shop. There was no drama, no announcement, just stillness. He passed in his sleep, wrapped in the same shawl he wore every morning. A small smile on his face. The whole village came out. Children carried paper lanterns. Elders whispered prayers. Teenagers read aloud from his book. And beneath the bench where he always sat, they found one last note tucked inside a matchbox. It read, "If you loved me, don't cry for me. Light a candle for someone else. Make tea for a stranger. Told someone's story like it's your own. That's all I ever tried to do. That's all I hope you do now." They lit 100 candles that night. The shop became a memory. The man, a legend. But not the kind that towers, the kind that gently lingers, whispers, waits. Rahim's story didn't change the world, but it changed people, and that, perhaps, is the greatest freedom of all, to give up what you thought you had to be, and become who you were quietly meant to be. Dear listener, if this story touched something inside you, something soft, something you thought the world had forgotten, please take a moment. Tell us what part spoke to you, or just leave a small note. The way Rahim might of. Subscribe if you'd like. More stories like this, quiet stories with loud hearts. It helps us keep sharing these human moments with others who may be searching for meaning. And if you feel alone, remember this: your story still matters, even now, especially now, with warmth and care. As autumn came, the village began to slow. The days shortened. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and distant harvest. Rahim loved this time of year, the in-between, when nature itself seemed to pause and take a breath. He'd sit on his wooden bench outside the shop, wrapped in his old shawl, listening to the rustling trees and the sounds of life winding down for the night. Sometimes, someone would join him, an old friend, a curious teenager, a stranger passing through, who had heard about the man who gave up his dreams but found peace. They would sit without speaking for long stretches, then talk softly about the things that mattered, not about politics or prices or news, but about the small regrets no one else wanted to hear. The brother never forgiven. The child lost too soon. The words never said. And Rahim would nod gently, not as someone who had the answers, but as someone who understood the ache. He had learned that sometimes the most healing words aren't words at all but presence. There was one conversation he never forgot. An older man, maybe in his late 70s, came from another town just to meet Rahim. He had watched the video too many times to count. He told Rahim, "My father never said he loved me. Not once. And I carried that like a wound for most of my life. But watching you reminded me that some men love in silence, in showing up, in staying, in working without complaint." I wish I could have told him I finally understood before he passed. Rahim didn't speak right away. He just put a hand on the man's shoulder and whispered, "Then tell him now. He'll hear you." They sat in silence after that. A silence that said everything. The shop became more than a place. A heartbeat. Children would bring their school stories to him for encouragement. Teenagers would bring their broken dreams to him for repair. Elders would bring their old memories, asking only to be remembered. And Rahim gave them all the same thing: space. He never rushed them, never judged. He just listened with the kind of softness that only comes from a life lived slowly. He often said, "We rush so much trying to matter that we forget we already do." One morning, a letter arrived, wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. It had no return address. Inside was a single photograph: Rahim and his mother, sitting on the shop step. He couldn't have been older than 4. On the back, in neat handwriting, he never forgot his mother's touch. "Neither should you." Rahim closed his eyes, a soft ache filling his chest. He had almost forgotten the tenderness in her eyes, the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear before speaking, how she used to hum while folding clothes. The photograph went into a new frame, right next to his father's. That day, he wrote a letter to his younger self. He wrote, "You didn't fail because you stayed. You didn't lose because your dreams changed. You didn't waste your life. You gave it. And someday, when you look back not at what the world applauded, but at who you became, quietly you'll see something beautiful. You kept the fire going." Rahim placed that letter in the shoebox with the others. Sometimes, when he felt doubt creeping in like a shadow at dusk, he would read it again, because even he needed reminding. As winter settled, the village transformed into a hush of snow and smoke. People visited less. The streets grew still. Rahim used this quiet time to write more, to reflect, and sometimes he simply sat at his table, watching the snow fall outside, feeling the comfort of being at peace with himself. That's when the invitation came. A small publishing house from Lahore had heard about the video. One of the editors had grown up in Rahim's village. She remembered buying erasers from him as a child. Now, she wanted to publish his memoir. Rahim smiled. Not out of pride, but disbelief. Not because he wanted to be known, but because his story, his quiet, slow, deeply human story, might one day sit on a shelf and whisper to someone else, "You're not too late. Your life still matters." He didn't rush the process. He edited the book with care, weaving in letters from readers, poems from the writing circle, memories of his parents, fragments of dreams he once had. The book was titled The Quiet Flame, A Life Between Dreams. It didn't become a bestseller, but it became something better. It became real. People passed it from hand to hand, leaving notes in the margins. A teacher in Karachi read a chapter every Friday to her students. A man in Canada sent him a photograph of the book beside his father's grave. "I never told him I forgave him," the man wrote, "but your words helped me say it, finally, through tears." That's all Rahim ever wanted. Not a monument, not a statue, just to know that his presence is being made. Life a little more tender for someone else, and that, somehow, became his legacy. He wasn't remembered for any one thing. He was remembered for his listening, his kindness, his willingness to carry the invisible weight of others. In a world that often shouted, Rahim had whispered, and his whisper carried farther than he ever imagined. Rahim never expected to become anything more than what he had already been: a shopkeeper, a caretaker, a steady presence in a world that so often spun too fast. But life, in its own poetic timing, was giving him something unexpected: freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom to remember who he truly was. He began to receive letters, not emails, not text-sexual letters, handwritten, folded with care. One came from a woman named Farida, who had watched the short film from a hospital bed. She had been battling cancer and wrote, "Your story made me cry in the most peaceful way. It reminded me that it's never too late to be kind to ourselves." Another was from a retired bus driver in Quetta. "You reminded me that even those of us who kept things moving in silence were part of something beautiful." Rahim would read each letter slowly, often more than once. Then he would tuck them gently into an old shoebox that once held his father's slippers. He kept that box near his writing table, now his heart archive. One day, he got a letter that made him pause longer than the others. It was from Meher, the first girl he ever loved. They hadn't spoken in over 50 years. Her letter was short but filled with warmth. "I saw you," she wrote. "I don't know if you remember our shared poetry back in school, but I've never forgotten. Your words still carry the same gentle truth. I'm proud of you." Rahim held the letter to his chest and closed his eyes. He did remember. All. It. The poetry under the banyan tree. The letters they passed between books. The soft way she laughed without covering her mouth. But life had taken them in different directions. She had married, moved away, lived her own full life. Still, it was something to know that real love never truly dies. It just softens into memory, and sometimes, when the world is quiet enough, it finds its way back. Rahim replied, not with hopes, not with longing, just gratitude, and that became his way of living now. He didn't seek fame or change. He simply gave thanks to every morning that brought light through his window, to every bird that paused on his balcony, to every word that arrived when he sat with his pen. He started a small writing circle at the local library, just for people at first, all over 60, all with stories they thought didn't matter. But Rahim knew better. He would tell them, our stories may not fill bookshelves, but they fill hearts. That's more important. The circle grew. Soon, it included widows writing about first loves, retired teachers writing about the child they never forgot, an old mason who wrote a poem about the walls he built and the people behind them. And Rahim, he began writing his memoir. He called it The Man Who Waited for Himself. He didn't expect it to be published. That wasn't the point. He just wanted to leave something behind, not just for the world, but for himself. One evening, as he sat by his window sipping cardamom tea, he whispered aloud, I didn't get the life I once dreamed of, but I found the one I needed. It was true. The regret never fully disappeared. Sometimes it still visited him in the middle of the night, like a familiar ghost. But now, it no longer haunted. It simply reminded him, we are made of both what we do and what we long for. And sometimes, what we long for waits patiently until we are ready to receive it. People around town started treating him differently, not because he was famous, but because he was present. He looked them in the eyes when they spoke. He remembered names. He told them their stories. People began to believe it too. A young boy once came into the shop with his mother and whispered shyly, Are you the man from the video who talks like a grandpa but writes like a poet? Rahim laughed so deeply it echoed in the aisles. Yes, I suppose I am, he said. The boy gave him a drawing, just a stick figure with a big smile and a book. Rahim pinned it on the back wall of the shop, right beside an old framed photo of his father. Everything had come full circle. He had run the shop out of duty for so long, but now he kept it open as a kind of community sanctuary. People didn't just come to buy pens or paper. They came to sit, to talk, to feel seen. one day. A woman in her 70s walked in and placed a notebook on the counter. "I haven't written in 40 years, she said, her eyes wet. "But your story made me remember how much I missed it." Rahim held the notebook like it was made of silk. He said only, "Welcome back." And that became his quiet mission, to welcome people back to themselves, to their stories, their forgotten dreams, their quiet courage. He never preached, he never claimed to have answers. He just listened, and in doing so, created a space where others began to listen to their hearts, their regrets, their hopes, their longings. And isn't that what we all really want in the end? Not perfection, not applause, but a place to be fully human. Rahim lived simply. No luxury, no travel, no acclaim, but in his small corner of the world. He had become a kind of lighthouse, a gentle beacon for anyone drifting through late life fog, trying to find their way home. He gave up his dreams and found unexpected freedom. There are some men whose stories begin quietly, not with great thunder or fame, but with the slow, steady beat of choosing others before themselves. This is a story like that. It's a story about a man named Rahim, and it might be a story about someone you know, or perhaps someone you once were. Rahim was the kind of man people often overlooked, but also the kind they counted on without thinking. Twice, the type who remembered everyone's birthdays but forgot his own dreams in the process. In his youth, Rahim had a dream that pulsed through him like a heartbeat. He wanted to be a writer, not for fame, not even for money. He just wanted to tell stories that made people feel something real. He kept a red notebook under his pillow where he scribbled thoughts at night, his mind glowing with characters and worlds no one else could see. But life, as it often does, made other plans. His father fell ill when Rahim was just 19. The family shop, a small stationery store, began bleeding losses. His mother had worry etched into the corners of her eyes, and his younger siblings needed school fees, food, guidance. Rahim tucked the red notebook into a drawer and told himself, later. But later never came. He stepped into the store, dusted the shelves, learned to order inventory, to greet customers, to smile even when he felt empty inside. People praised him. "You're so responsible, Rahim. You're such a good son. You're doing the right thing." And maybe he was. But each night, after locking up the shop, Rahim would sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the stars and feel something tug at him from deep within, like a song he once knew, but had forgotten the lyrics too. Years passed, his siblings grew, married, moved, his parents aged, and eventually left the world quietly, like whispers fading into night. Rahim remained, still in the same town, still in the same shop, still nodding politely at neighbors who called him kind, steady, and selfless. But the red notebook remained in that same drawer, yellowed, forgotten dot, until one winter morning. No sounds of footsteps in the hallway, and the quiet truth that he was alone. It wasn't tragic, just still. He made his tea, stood by the window, and suddenly asked aloud, what was it all for? Question surprised him. He had never dared ask it before. That's the thing about living for others for so long, you forget you're allowed to wonder what you needed, who you were, and if it's not too late to remember. That day, he pulled out the red notebook. He held it with a care one might give an old friend after years apart. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the dreams still lived there, quiet, waiting. And for the first time in decades, Rahim wrote, not much, just a paragraph. But in that moment, something cracked open inside him, a warmth, a quiet hum of aliveness, as if some part of him, long buried, had stirred awake. He didn't stop. Each day, after tending the shop, he would write short stories, letters to no one, reflections about life, grief, joy, about the quiet sacrifices that no one applauds, the weight of duty, the ache of unrealized dreams, but also the strange beauty of it all. He began walking again, around the lake, through old streets. He started noticing things, the way the sky changed color just before dusk, the way a child laughed with their entire body, the way his own breath felt when he was fully present. Rahim wasn't becoming someone new. He was returning to who he had always been. People noticed a change. You seem lighter, the tea vendor said one morning. You're glowing, said the librarian, handing him another book of short stories. And Rahim would smile, a real one. Not the polite kind, but not everyone understood. When his niece came to visit, she frowned at the notebook on the table. Mom, you writing stories at your age. What's the point now? He only smiled and said, sometimes we do things not for outcome, but for healing. She didn't understand. Not yet. One evening, a younger man entered his shop. He had a camera slung over his shoulder and restless eyes. I heard you used to write, he said, uncertain. I still do, Rahim replied. The young man introduced himself as Samir. He was a local filmmaker trying to collect stories from the older generation before they were lost. He asked if Rahim would speak on camera, tell his story. Rahim hesitated, not out of fear, but because, for most of his life, he believed his story didn't matter. But that night, he thought about the red notebook, the dusted shelves, the long-lost dreams, and the unexpected joy of coming back to himself. So he agreed, Samir recorded him over a series of evenings. Tea between them, stories flowing like a river, unblocked. Rahim didn't dramatize. He didn't pretend to be wise. He simply spoke the truth as it lived in his bones. When the short film was uploaded weeks later, Rahim forgot about it. To his writing, his walks, his quiet joy. But the world hadn't forgotten. The video resonated. Thousands watched, commented, shared. A woman from another city wrote, "Your story reminded me of my father. He died thinking he failed us. But now I understand the quiet love he gave." Another said, "I'm 68. I just opened the sketchbook I buried in the attic in 1983. Thank you." The words washed over Rahim like sunlight. He hadn't become a writer for fame, but he had become one by returning to himself. And in doing so, he offered others permission to do the same.